So we're going to talk about making reliable promises. And it's interesting because each of us, we all make reliable promises in our personal life. Sometimes they're very complex promises, but often we struggle to see reliable promise making being made in a work context. So we're going to explore that a little bit today. Just trying to move on to the next slide. And Diane, I seem to be stuck.
Oh, you had to click on it, then you move on. This is what.
Okay. There we go. So just by way of a quick introduction, so I'm a director of Vision Consulting. I've been working with a methodology called commitment-based management to deliver improvement for our clients. Commitment-based management is fundamentally based around coordination and using commitments. And as Doan introduced, using Fernando Flores and Chauncey Bell's commitment loop. Many of you will be familiar with the commitment loop as part of the Last Planner system. Vision actually acquired Fernando's company back in 2000, and I work very closely with Fernando and Chauncey Bell on my construction projects today. So in the brief 30 minutes, what I want to do is give an overview of really four main areas. So why commitments and promises, why are they important here, how we develop commitments in the Last Planner system and the different types of commitments, some of the challenges that we observe and see that we need to be aware of in making and keeping commitments. And then I'm going to propose 5 steps for you in terms of building your own commitment culture. In the last 4 years in particular, I've been working in construction projects, applying the Last Planner system, lean methodologies, and using the commitment-based management. We've been setting the goals around getting to site in half the time and getting off site in half the time, and we're having a lot of success in that space. I'm actually looking to build a brand around get off site in half the time. Now, as this is a promise-based conversation, my promise to you as part of this session in the next 30 minutes, you'll be able to observe the language of commitments, and you'll have a sense of the steps needed to develop a culture of reliable commitments in your own organizations. So let's begin with why commitments and promises. So I think you will have heard about people saying that commitments are at the heart of lean or the Last Planner system. Well, I go a step further and say that commitments are actually what makes the Last Planner system work and what produces the significant results. The beauty of making commitments is that it brings a confidence about the future, and it lets people plan out of that confidence. It doesn't bring certainty about the future, and this is where trust and commitments are intermingled here, because we're forever making assessments around that level of confidence that we have in somebody else's commitments to us. The last point I'd make here is that a lack of making explicit commitments or people not being clear on the commitments is one of the main reasons why people, when they apply the Last Planner system, perhaps don't get the results that they were expecting. I'd like us to just step back for a moment and think about process. In a traditional sense, when people were thinking about designing process and certainly documenting process in swim lanes, for example, people focused on material processes, they focused on data processes, and they may have looked at money as part of the exchange here, but they didn't think really about commitment process. People would identify roles that need to be played when they're designing process, but not about the commitments. If you look at the material processes on their own, certainly in that area, there's opportunities to cut costs and cycle times. And in the data process area, there's opportunity to improve automation using data, improve communication, and improve decision-making. But when you look at the commitment process, commitment process really is about building trust and collaboration across teams. And the benefit of it is that you actually can reap the benefits of those other processes as well. So you have the ability to reduce cycle times, improve the communication and the decision-making. You know, from my experience, when you design a well-constructed and supported commitment process, you'll deliver dramatic results. And that's across any business and any type of process, whether that be sales improvement, productivity improvement, customer service, or in fact, cycle and cost reduction. So let's look at developing commitments in the Last Planner system. there's different types of commitments that are being made and contracted for at different levels. So obviously we've got our overarching contract that gets put in place between a client or owner and a contractor. We then have contracts put in place with the key parties, whether they be subcontractors, designers, and consultants. And then we have different types of commitments being made at the different stages of the last planner system. Those are the ones I'd like to explore here in terms of the last planner system. So at the master planning level, we're establishing the key promises of the project. We're getting clear on what value looks like for the value and for the owner and for the client. At the pool planning stage, we're starting to develop what we call the network of commitments. So we're identifying who the key customer and performers are for the main activities that need to happen. And as we make ready planning, we're looking at commitments to remove constraints, to clear the blockages. And at the weekly planning level, we're making daily and weekly specific commitments. And then as part of the retrospect, we're learning around how did we do on making the commitments? Where did we succeed? Where did we fail? What are the patterns in the failing? Is it certain individuals that are struggling to make commitments that we can rely on? Is it teams or particular areas? Now, during all of these different meeting practices that go on across the different time phases here, we see communication with the people. It's not about information sharing, but it's predominantly around requests for action, and then making assessments or judgments around the value of those actions. Team performance and teamwork is shaped by carrying out the conversations that produce coordination and commitment. We call these the conversation for action. And as part of the last planner system, if you're a practitioner, you'll know the commitment loop sits in the background as a map for helping us navigate commitments and what commitments look like. As I say, it's really a map. It has some key principles. And for those of you who are not familiar, I'm just going to go over a couple of the principles. So we use this between people developing commitments with each other. We have what we call a customer and a performer. And we go through stages of conversation, starting with the top left quadrant here, which we call preparation, developing a request or an offer, moving through a negotiation phase, and then actually going about doing what we said we'd commit to. Finishing up with a fourth quadrant called acknowledgement, where the customer declares that they're satisfied or dissatisfied with the work that's been completed. In the center of this, we have something called conditions of satisfaction. That's very specific around the commitment, the time, the details of what's being delivered, and what that looks like, which we call the quality. Now, this approach is fantastic for going after, siloed working in organizations where you're not clear on customer and performer. So this approach is very different to a hierarchical approach in the company. In fact, the hierarchy is irrelevant here. So anybody could be a customer or performer in these conversations. There's something that Vision do that you may not be familiar with is that we actually use this commitment loop to design process. So in all key activities in a process, we're thinking about who the customer and performers are, where customers are missing in particular in process, or in fact, you have customers, but they don't act as customers. So this is how we use this in the background, as I say, for all of our process design work. If you learn how to use this approach in your own process design, I can guarantee that that's going to drive significant improvements for you. In fact, dramatic results. I mentioned the network of commitments. So I want to say a little bit about that here, and you don't need to see the detail, but it's really just highlighting a few key points. What we're doing in the network of commitments is as I say, we're identifying who the customer and the performers are and being very clear on the conditions of satisfaction. So we do that through a process. Here's an example of a pre-construction process going through different gates. And for the key activities, being very clear on who the main customer, who the performers are, the timeframes for when things are expected, and the conditions of satisfaction. Obviously, this is just background context for a process. So all of these require conversations with people as customers and performers to agree what can be delivered. and by when. As I say, the pool planning exercise is the start of the development of this network of commitments, when you're beginning to identify what are the key activities and who are the customer and performers here. Okay. I'd like to just conclude this section in terms of why commitments, with making reference to what's been written about in terms of 5 great wastes. So Chauncey Bell wrote some articles around referring to Taiichi Ohno's wastes from the 70s and 80s, but he's gone to identify what he sees as the 5 great wastes which we face now. So these are not listening to each other well, bureaucratic styles within companies, too much worshipping of information, suppressed innovation in teams, and workers' toil. The last point I just want to make here is that the commitment approach, if you study it, the commitment approach actually goes a long way to addressing all of these points. Let's turn to some of the challenges in terms of making and keeping commitments. Well, the first point I'd say is it's hard. It's very difficult. And in fact, I haven't seen any organization do this well without help. And in fact, a typical starting point is that people do not want to make commitments, and they're super skilled at avoiding commitments, even to the point that they make you feel like you have a commitment when you don't. So some of the things to watch out for in conversation, that, you know, people saying that should be okay when you make a request, or no problem, or I'll get right on it. But you don't have clear requests when you have conversations like that. Now, why is this the case? Why is it so difficult? Well, first of all, it's conceptually difficult for people to think through if they can keep a commitment, all the elements that play a part to enable them to actually be able to do that. And by making a commitment, just uttering the words triggers a fear factor that you're going to get blamed if you don't fulfill the commitment. People often make commitments without considering their overall demands in terms of new commitments that are going to come their way, as well as the reliance that they have on other people in order for them to fulfill that, part of the network of commitments again. And for many companies and many folk, people don't feel like they can say no. So they end up over-promising on what they can do. So how do we go about trying to address some of these challenges and building a commitment culture? How do we do it? So I'm proposing a 5-step approach here. The first is to put in place well-defined meeting practices. I call these practices because they are really the place that you want to try and develop your own skills and competencies around commitments. And I include the network of commitments in this practice as well. We need to pay attention to language and mood. We need to spend time on agreeing the conditions of satisfaction. We need to support people about the state of their network of commitments. And we need to talk about trust and distrust together. Now, the first point around practices, these are well defined in the last planner system. I'm not going to go through the practices today. Unfortunately, we don't have time for doing that. But I am just going to say a little bit about the other 4 points here. Another point, is just having experienced coaches in your teams to support you with these steps. So playing the role of actually demonstrating what good looks like, facilitating the conversations, and coaching the teams to have these kind of conversations. These all produce, from my experience, immediate results, and they lay your foundation for your commitment culture. So language and mood. We don't have time today to talk through speech acts. However, I want to just highlight the key words that are used for you to be able to observe language of commitment. We talked before about the different process types, material processes, information processes, and I want to introduce here the language of commitment. So you can see in the boxes some examples of the words that we use in the material world, some of the words we use to describe the world of material, some of the words we use to describe data, and the language of commitment. So we pay attention to offers, requests, declines, promises, assertions and assessments. These are the language of action. And I invite you, when you're in your meetings, to pay attention and start to observe language. Often we see people who describe the world. For example, they will say, I was in a good meeting yesterday, etc. And they describe what's going on around them, but they don't enter any language around commitment. And in fact, we're back to avoiding commitment again. So I invite you just to pay attention to these words, see when they show up in your meeting, and observe when people are in a descriptive mode, as opposed to in a conversation where they're actually looking to commit to doing something. Conditions of satisfaction. Unfortunately, we don't spend enough time considering what the conditions of satisfaction or what success looks like when we make commitments. Often in meetings, we're in a rush to assign actions, and we don't even consider that we're taking the right actions to take care of the concerns of our customers here. So I invite you again, when you have opportunity, or if it's not clear, to go after your scope, the time, format, stakeholders that need to be involved, and the effort and resources that need to be involved to succeed. It's all got to come out of conversation. Don't make assumptions here. In terms of supporting people, what do we mean by supporting people? Well, again, it's supporting them around their commitments. So it's okay to make mistakes. We need to learn from them. Don't fall into the blame game. What often I observe when people begin making commitments for the first time in companies is that they end up developing what I call to be a commitment thug. So they start bullying people into making commitments. People need to make their own commitments. They need to feel it's okay actually to overcommit and to learn from that. But people need some space to learn here. We need to support people in making judgments in what they can do and what they can't do. It's what we call practical wisdom, to being able to think together around what is the appropriate level of commitments that we want to make. We want to set challenging targets, but we don't want to overcommit people so they feel failure either. You need to share your concerns with people, explain consequences and the impact on the project if people do fail or go late on their commitments. What does that mean? What's the knock-on effect for people, so people are aware of that? And help people not lose the big picture. So people are making specific commitments, but what does it mean in terms of moving the project forward and the impact that it has? And to encourage people to ask for help. Okay, it's very much team collaboration. One person fails, the team fails. So get people in conversations for help. Now, I mentioned at the beginning around how we're making we're bringing a level of confidence by making a commitment to the present. It's not certainty. And as we, all the time, we're making assessments around the commitments that people are making to us as to whether we can rely on those or not. Now, every time somebody delivers a commitment to you reliably, they're building trust with you. But the opposite is true as well. So when people fail on their commitments, you develop distrust with a person. Now, we strongly recommend that people have conversations with each other about the areas of distrust. Now, that's easier said than done. It's very difficult. And often that does require some facilitation and support to be able to have those kind of conversations. But the ways to build trust with each other are to listen for concerns of the other person, have conversations about the concerns, and then to observe and engage in offers. And more often than not, we don't see people making offers. So a good question for yourselves: do you make offers to your customers, or do you just sit back and wait for requests? When you're making requests of others, you need to make very clear requests and make commitments, right? Bring the right mood to the conversation as well. So we haven't had the chance to talk very much about mood, but particularly when you're trying to resolve difficult issues, is bringing the right mood, particularly around ambition to solve the issue, and don't get caught up in the despair of the issue itself. Just another couple of points here in terms of the assessments we make about people's commitments is we're always thinking about, is the person competent in terms of making the commitment? Are they sincere in making the commitment? And as you develop these together, it's all for the sake of developing the bigger picture for both parties, customer and performer, and for the team. So just to recap, we've talked a little bit about why commitments are important and the power of developing good networks of commitments and the improvements that can make. As I say, we're delivering projects in half the time as a result of taking this approach and using the commitment loop to design process. We talked about the different commitments as part of the last planner system, the different levels and contractual commitments, as well as the different commitment conversations required at the different stages of the last planner system. We talked about some of the challenges in making and keeping commitments, and I proposed an approach around the 5 steps to building a commitment culture. And just as a reminder, put that challenge to you to start observing conversations in your meetings. Are they descriptive conversations, or are people in conversations for action? Just to summarize here and to give you a steer on a few documents for your own reading in terms of developing your own skills and competencies in this space, I've got 3 articles that I'm suggesting, one by Fernando Flores and one by his daughter, Gloria Flores, and one by Charles Spinoza on promise-based management. I'm also writing a blog on how to make and secure reliable promises, which are published on the Lean Construction blog. The first article there, called Making Promises, is live and up on the website. And the second article here is to follow in about 3 weeks' time. So that concludes the session for today. Thank you for listening. I know it's been a bit of a rush tour in the short time we've had, but I hope you're getting some takeaways from that session today. And thank you all for listening.